So once you've started creating a slightly more complex React app, you might want to start getting users to log in and register for it and actually start using it. But providing authentication and authorization can be a tricky subject, and there's lots of different ways that you can approach it. So one good approach is to actually use a third party to actually do all of the authentication for you. So in this tutorial, I'm going to show you how you can use a third party provider called Userfront to actually authenticate and get the users signed up and logged into your application quickly and easily. So we're going to be using Userfront to actually create a secure area of your app and also to secure a Node.js endpoint as well. And just a bit of a warning, there's a few technical things that I'm going to gloss over, like JWTs and how you might go about working with tokens, but hopefully you'll be able to see how you can use Userfront to actually get users signed up, logged in, and actually secure resources on your backend in a few simple steps. So let's take a look at Userfront and start coding up our application.
Okay, so as mentioned, we're going to be using this third-party service called Userfront to do our authentication and sign up for our new users. And the first thing you'll need to do if you haven't got one already is go and sign up for an account with them. You don't need to actually sign up with any credit card details or anything like that. You can literally use your email address or GitHub profile to do that. And the sign-up process is pretty straightforward. Once you've done that, you'll actually get an account that looks a little bit like this. That's already got some preloaded users in there just to test things out. But what we'll actually be doing now in the tutorial is using this Userfront service to create a login system within a simple React app. And we'll also create an API endpoint that will be secured by Userfront. So basically only logged in users can access the data that's provided from that endpoint. So if you're not sure what that means, it all will become clear very shortly. But let's get started by setting up our React app and setting up the Node backend. And then we'll layer the Userfront service on top of that to actually secure the backend. Okay, so we'll come back to the control panel in just a second, but let's just head on over to the terminal for a moment. And I'm just going to use create React app to actually create a new app, just to save some time getting set up. And we'll just call this user account demo, for example. And I'm also going to make sure we're using TypeScript as the template, just so we can type a bit of the data that we're going to be using within our sample app. So I'll just let that install. So once that's done, let's navigate into the new directory. So user account demo, and we'll open that up in Visual Studio Code. And let me just open up a new terminal. Okay, so the first thing I'm going to do is just install React Router DOM. So we're going to have different routes for the different pages, such as signing up and logging in, for example. I'm actually just going to create all of the rooted components in here as well, just so everything's all in one place so you can see what's going on. But for example, in our home, we'll just have a H2 that says home. Make sure we'll just implicitly return that, so we don't need a return keyword in there. And pretty much for the same thing for login, and just replace home with login. And then one more for password reset, so we've got the ability to reset passwords there. And the last one that we'll have, which will be kind of like the administration page for the user, we'll just call that one dashboard. Okay, so we've got some components, and these will host all of the different parts of the application. So it's quite simple for this example. And I'm just going to get rid of all of the React boilerplate up here from Create React App. And then we do need to get some things imported from the React Router DOM library. So let me import the browser router as router, the switch component, also root, link, and redirect as well. And that's in the React Router DOM library. Okay, so we can then start working on the application, which again is going to be quite straightforward. We're going to have a router in there, and inside that we'll have a navigation section. So an unordered list, and basically we've just got some links in here. So that link component, link to home, so we can always get home. And then let's just copy this a few more times. So then we'll have a login page, a link to the password reset, and finally the main one for accessing data will be the dashboard. Okay, and then we just actually need to display the pages as well there. So once we've finished our navigation, we use the switch component, and then we create a new route, and this one is going to be for login, and we'll have the login component inside there. And then we'll have one more route, which will be for the password reset. So we'll just call the route reset as we've matched in the link above there. Make sure that's inside the route component itself. Okay, and yeah, the component inside that, of course, was just called password reset. Okay, and then we've got another route, and this path is going to be for dashboard, and that will contain the dashboard component. And finally, we'll just have one last route, which is for the home page, and that will just be no actual name on the path, just a /, and we'll render the home component for that. Okay, so that's our navigation and our routed components set up. Let's make sure we spelt them all the same as in the links, and the routes and the components all match up. Probably one thing you'll find as well, if you're using React Router DOM inside TypeScript as well, you may need to install types for it as well. So if you hover over the actual error message here that's coming up, you can see that it doesn't recognize the declarations from React Router DOM, so we can just use this npm command here to just install those as a dependency. They're a development dependency, so we can do -d and types React Router DOM. And if we just install those, should find when Visual Studio catches up that error message disappears. So we're now in a position just to run this simple app and just check that the navigation's working as we want to. So let's run npm run start. And once that's compiled, you can see we've got our navigation, and this is the home routed component. And if we go to login, password reset and dashboard, they're all working as we would expect. Of course, there's no content in there at the moment, so we're going to do two things. We're first of all going to populate the dashboard using a simple Node API endpoint, and then we'll add Userfront on top of that to actually secure this dashboard route, and then in turn the API itself, so that that private data can only be accessed once the user has actually logged in. Okay, so let's go and create that server application now. So in our project, I'll just create a new directory called server, and inside there a new file called server.js. Okay, so in order to make our server run, we're going to use Express. Let me just get a new tab open here. So let's install Express. We'll also install the cause package, and we're also going to be validating our tokens that we'll be creating with Userfront using the JSON web token package. So let's just install all of those now. It gets ready. Okay, and because we don't have access to ES6 import syntax, we're going to have to require these dependencies here. So we'll require Express and also the cause package. And I will import the JWT package as well for the moment, but we'll come on to using that once we've got Userfront set up and working. Okay, so let's create a new app and make sure it's using the cause package. This is just because we'll be calling the actual endpoints from our React app on the current port, which I think is 3000. So we need to use a different port for our Express application, and those requests will fail if we don't allow cross-origin requests to come through. So just for your information, why that we're putting that in there. Okay, so we'll create one endpoint, and it'll just be an endpoint called data. You can call it anything you like, and we'll have access to the request and response objects. And all it's going to do really, it's very simple, is just return some data. So we'll create an object, so some secret data is the property, and the data in there is just sh. Obviously in a real world application this would be more complex, but just as an example, this is the endpoint that we're going to be getting data from in our app, and then also securing with Userfront as well. So let's actually just get that running. I've got NodeMon installed globally here, so I'm just going to use that to continually watch the server application for changes. So NodeMon server. And actually I've forgotten to make the app listen here, so let's just add that in before we check that it's working. So I'm going to run the app on port 3010, and when it's running, just give a little message to say that it's running okay. So app run listening on port 3010. And we can see that message appearing there now. So if we go back to the browser, And if we go to localhost 3010, we can see there's nothing there on the main endpoint, but if we go to data, the endpoint that we created, you can see that that object is being returned successfully. So that seems to be set up and working okay. Let's actually get this API call into the app and display it on the dashboard. So back over in our React app, let's head on down to the dashboard component. And instead of just implicitly returning this JSX now, we're going to be doing a bit of work in here. So let's just return that there. So I'm going to set up a bit of state for that private data. So the private data and set private data is equal to use state. Make sure that's imported for us. And I'll actually type the data that's stored in there. So from our server.js file, you can see it just returns one object that has a property of some secret data. So I'm just going to type the data that's being stored as such. And we'll just leave that being initialized as null to start off with. Okay, and then what I'll do in this dashboard component, we'll have a use effect hook. Basically just runs once when the dashboard component is created. And inside there we've got an asynchronous block of code, which is basically just going to use the fetch API to call out to our endpoint, which is just HTTP localhost 3010 was the endpoint, and then data was the name of the endpoint that we're calling. And we'll also just tack on the response here so we can convert it to JSON so it can be used in the app. So with that result that we get, we'll just call the set private data state and we'll just pass it the value of result. Let's just put a catch block in here in case there are any errors. So what this will do is when the component loads, we'll make a call out to our endpoint, save the data in our local state of the dashboard component. And then what we'll also do in addition is we'll put another section down here in the actual rendered component. And we'll just say private data. And what we'll do is just output that as some stringified JSON. So it'll basically show us the whole object that's being returned. So if we save that, and you can see how that looks now in the React app. Okay, you can see that if we go to the home page, we just get the blank component, back to the dashboard, and we've got the private data, which is the result that's been returned from the endpoint. Okay, so that is the app setup. We're going to now move on to actually setting up Userfront, and first of all creating like the login and the sign up pages, and then once we've got that set up and users can log in, we'll secure this dashboard component route in the app, but then we'll also secure the Node endpoint as well, because at the moment it's publicly accessible, we're not logged in and we can access this secret data. So we're going to require the user to log in before they can access this particular endpoint. Okay, so back in our terminal, let's just open up a new tab because we need to install the Userfront package. So there are different packages available for different frameworks, but obviously we're using React here now. So let's say npm i Userfront React. And then if we try and import this into our TypeScript app here, you will see that we'll get a similar problem to what we had with the React router DOM types. Let's first of all get it imported, so Userfront React. You'll see that it'll say there are no types available for us, but there unfortunately isn't a types package for it. So what I'm going to do is just create an index.d.ts file, a declaration file, and I'll declare a new module which will be Userfront React. So unfortunately we won't get any nice type scripting abilities with this, but it will get rid of the error for us by declaring this as an empty module. So let's just check it's in our ts config. Okay, so we're going to include the source directory in here, but also index.d.ts. So this will just tell TypeScript to look in this file for any declarations, and as you can see, that error message has now gone from our app.tsx file. Okay, so what Userfront will provide us is it'll actually create components for us for sign up, login and password reset forms, so we don't actually have to make any of that markup ourselves. But what we actually have to do is create those sign up forms based on a specific ID that's been set up in our account. And one thing that's not quite clear in the documentation if you read it through is how you actually go about doing that. But after a bit of trial and error, I found that if you just go into your account in Userfront, head on over to the toolkit section, and you can see here are all the components that you will have for logging in and signing up, etc. So if we go to the sign up one to get us started, if you scroll down, there's information on how to install it. So if we go to the React tab, obviously we've done the installation already of the package, but you can see here it shows you how to actually get set up with the sign up form. So the first thing we need to do is copy this userfront.init, and this is the special code that's available for my particular account. So we can just pop that somewhere outside of the app component. And then obviously we can create a new sign up form component just by copying this code here. As I say, there's no other way really to find out what these special tool IDs and special codes are other than going into the account and finding out. So you might as well just go and copy the whole piece of code that they give you within that toolkit section. But once that's done, you've actually now got a component called sign up form that you can use within your app. So we want to put that on the home page so the users can sign up and create new accounts. So we can just literally copy that sign up form code into there, hit save, and if we go back to the app and navigate to the home page, you can see straight away we've got a sign up component which will allow users to put their name, email address and password in. So let's go ahead and set that up. So we'll say James, and then James at juniordevelopercentral.com, and let me just put a password in there. And then let's hit the sign up button. And you can see that's actually taking me now to the dashboard page automatically. And if we go over to the Userfront account and go back to users, you can see we've now got a new user of James with that email address, and quite strangely it's created this username for me as well. So in the sign up form it didn't give me the option to create a username, and if I'm honest I haven't really dived into the documentation that much to see how you can customize these sign up components to allow you to do that. So we'll be using our email address to actually log in. So what that's actually done for us is it's created the new user obviously in the account, and it's obviously logged us in straight away as well. And if you look in the application section of your developer tools, you can see it's created 3 tokens for us to use within our application. So we've got a refresh token, an access token and an ID token, and so we can use these to verify whether the user is actually logged in or not. But Userfront does that for us, and when we come to secure the dashboard page, you'll see how that works. But just to let you know, that's what it's doing when you create a new account or log in. Okay, so let's go back to Userfront and the toolkit, and let's finish off the rest of these components here. So we've got the login page here, or login form rather. So let's go and grab that and create a new component for that, which we can then pop onto the login page. Same thing again for the password reset. And you can see all of these tool IDs are unique, so that's really the only option you've got is to go and copy and paste those component creation methods from there. But it's fairly painless anyway, and it gives you all of the forms to log in and reset your password and so forth. Okay, and the last one is for logout, to give us a logout button. And let's create that here. Okay, and with the logout button, I'll just put that in the dashboard component as well. So let's just put this at the bottom of our private data that we've got here. So now back in the app, you can see in the dashboard page, we've got the ability to log out. So if I just click that, it'll take me to the login page again. I should have cleared those tokens from there as well. So now we've got a login page, password reset page. And if we go to the dashboard, things are still working. We shouldn't be able to access this at the moment, but you can see the logout button is grayed out. So really super simple, just copying and pasting those codes from the Userfront toolkit into your app. And if we do actually log back in with the email address, as I said, the username is a bit long to remember. You can see it's now taken us back to the dashboard again, and we've got the ability to log out. So Userfront is obviously recognizing that we're actually logged in again. And if we do go to things like the login page as well, you'll see it'll just redirect us. It won't allow us to go there because you can't log in when you're already logged in. Okay, so we're going to start working on securing the 2 parts of our application now. First of all, this dashboard component, and then also the Node.js endpoint as well. So let's go to the dashboard component to do that. So what we're going to do once the dashboard component has been loaded, we'll actually check Userfront to see if it has an access token. And you can do that on the global Userfront object just by calling a function called access token, and that will basically return a true or false value depending on whether the user is logged in or not. So here we're saying if they're not logged in, if they don't have an access token, we'll return something different from the dashboard content. And that will be a redirect component. And we just pass that a to object, and we'll just say the path name is /login. Okay, so if we save that, if we try and go to the dashboard page now, you'll see it'll automatically take us back to the login page and won't let us access that because we're actually logged in. But if we do log in, then obviously the dashboard component is activated and we can see the private data that's been rendered in the second part of that dashboard component. Okay, so another strange thing I found in the documentation is that in the Userfront object, there's supposed to be a user object which contains all the information that Userfront has about the user, but that didn't seem to exist for me. And if you actually log out the whole global Userfront object in the browser, if you take a look at it here, you can see we've got some functions like access token and build, which we use to actually build the components. There's login, logout, etc. But there's no user object available there. So one thing we can do is we do have access to the access token that the Userfront service has generated, so we can get some information about the user from that. So what I'll do is I'll say our user data is equal to JSON parse A to B to change it from base64, and the Userfront access token, and all we want to do is actually get the middle element of the JWT, and we'll store that in user data, and then we'll do the same sort of thing again in the dashboard component. We'll say the user data, and inside a pre-tag we'll say JSON stringify user data null 2, and if you go back over to the dashboard, you can see it's got some useful information about the logged in user, like their user ID, and also things like their name, which is always useful. Okay, so we've secured our root in our React app using the Userfront library, so the dashboard component and root is only available when the user's logged in, but we're still getting the private data here from the Node endpoint, and that's still unsecured, so anyone can access it just like this. So we're going to go back to the Node application now and actually secure this endpoint so that it can't be read publicly unless you're actually logged in. Okay, so the first thing we'll do, let's go back to our server code. I'm going to create an environment file just to hold one bit of information. So I'm going to export one object from this module, and it will have basically one property in there called Userfront public key. So we're going to be basically verifying the tokens that are being sent to this endpoint based on the Userfront public key, and this will tell us whether the tokens have actually been generated from the Userfront service and are actually valid tokens. So we can go back to our Userfront dashboard to find that information, and I think if we go over to settings and scroll down a little bit here, you can see the JWT public key is available. So we can just copy that, go back to our environment file and paste that in, and we need to be careful that we don't introduce any white space in there using the template literal. So let's just make sure that's all lined up nicely. So this is just all one big string basically. So it's probably worth pointing out that you'd probably want to put this into some kind of environment variable or to some kind of secure secrets manager. Although it's only a public key and it's publicly available, it's worth having this sort of stuff hidden so that people can't take a guess at how your authentication's been set up. And it just makes things easier to change if you need to later on. One thing we can do maybe is just in our git ignore, just say server environment.js, just remove that, so that it's not actually tracked in the repository. Okay, so that's our environment setup. Let's go over to the server code. So we've already installed the JWT library. Let's just import the public key that we created a moment ago. And that's in the environment file. And we're basically going to create a function called Authenticate token, which will be a piece of middleware that we can pop into any of our requests to make it a bit more reusable. And so the job of this function is basically to take the token, verify it, and if it fails, if it's not a good token for whatever reason, then we'll return a 401 error and say that the token's no good. And then the request that we're trying to secure, for example, our data endpoint, won't actually get called. So in order to do that, we need to find out what the auth header that's been sent is. So this depends on how you want to set it up, but we're just going to create a header called authorization in our app in a moment. So authorization, which is a fairly standard way of doing it. And then we're going to actually get the token from that. And what we'll actually be doing is we'll be using the sort of bearer format. So when the token comes through, the authorization header will look a little bit like this, and there'll be our token at the end of it. So this will be the actual value that we're getting. So we'll split it based on the space that's in the middle. So auth header.split. And then we want to get the second component of it, which will actually be the token, which is here. Okay, so if that fails, if we can't find that token for whatever reason, if maybe it doesn't exist or it's not been supplied, or it's been supplied in a bad manner, then we'll return on the response res.status 401 for unauthorized. And then we'll send some JSON as well. We'll just say the message is bad token. So that's just checking if the token exists. If it does, we can actually try and verify it. So we'll do that using the JWT library that we imported. So we'll await jwt.verify, returns a promise, and we pass it the token and also the Userfront public key. So in the previous step, we've got the token, and now we're going to pass it to this JWT library and verify it with the public key to make sure that it hasn't been tampered with. And if that's the case, if it's good, then what we can do is we can create a new property on the request object called auth in case we need to use any of that information later on, which we won't be doing in this tutorial, but just show you where you can put that information. But if there's a problem with that verification process, we do the same thing as before. We return response status 401 for unauthorized, and then again a message, and we'll just say again bad token. Okay, so with that authenticate token function complete, what we can then do is just take the function, and as I say, it's a piece of middleware, so any of our routes that we've got like this, we can just pop it in there before the actual request and response of the endpoint is called. So what will happen now is when the user requests the data endpoint, we'll try and authenticate a token first before then finally returning the some secret data object. Okay, so if we save that now, hopefully that should reload. And if we go over into our browser, let's go to the tab that we had where we were just loading the endpoint before. And if we refresh that now, you can see we're now getting the bad token message simply because we're not passing an authorization header here. We're just trying to make a naked request to the node endpoint. And what we should find if we go back to the React app now as well, if we refresh the dashboard, you can see whereas previously it was telling us quite happily about the private data, now we're getting the bad token message because we're not actually sending the token within our app. So that really is the final piece of the puzzle. We've secured the endpoint and the user can't access it. Let's go back to the app.tsx file. So all we really need to do here when we're making our request to the data endpoint in our useEffect function is to actually supply the authorization header. So with fetch, we can do that by providing some additional options in an object, and the object has a property of headers, which basically just takes an object where we can pass in any headers that we want to send to the back end. So if you remember, we created an authorization header check in the server.js. So here it's looking for authorization. They're automatically transferred into lowercase, so we don't need to worry about that, but you can see the header we're looking for is authorization. So let's go back here. And what's the format of the header? Well, as we said before, we have the bearer prefix followed by a space, and then we just need to supply the access token that's been provided to us by Userfront. So that's just simply a case of on the Userfront global object calling access token, which we know contains all of the token information because we used it down here to actually get the user information to display on the dashboard route. So if we save that and then go back to the dashboard in our app, and now if we actually refresh the page, you can see that the some secret data has returned. And if we actually look at the network request that's being sent, So we've got the one request to the data endpoint there. If you scroll up, you can see we're calling that endpoint, and if we look at the request headers, you can see there's the authorization header being set with the prefix of bearer, and that is the access token that's been provided to us from Userfront. So there we have it. We've set up a small React app with different routes that allows users to register on a sign-up page. They can then log in, and then we can go to a dashboard page which is private, so it can only be accessed by users that are logged in. And we've also created a simple Node backend service that has one endpoint which provides some data, but only when you supply the access token given to us from Userfront. So that's pretty much it for this tutorial. Hopefully you found it useful. I know there's probably a lot of concepts to take in, especially if you're not familiar with them, but hopefully you've seen how you can use Userfront quite easily to set up your login pages and your registration pages, and then use those to actually secure a dashboard or private area, and also secure a Node backend with the token that's provided to you via Userfront. So thanks very much for taking the time to watch. Just before you go, don't forget to subscribe to support the channel and so you don't miss out on any future tutorials, and I'll see you next time.